It began in the quietest hours of a summer night in 1942, when the Atlantic waves lapped against the hulls of German submarines, carrying men who were trained to infiltrate the very heart of America. To the casual observer, the United States appeared untouched by war, a land of bustling cities, growing suburbs, and factories humming with wartime production. But beneath this surface, a shadow war was underway, one fought not with tanks or planes, but with whispers, coded messages, and unseen eyes. The enemy had crossed oceans, seeking to strike not only at military targets but at the very idea of American security. Spies, saboteurs, and secret agents were already walking the streets, blending seamlessly into ordinary life, armed with knowledge that could destroy the nation from within. The most dramatic of these early operations was known as Operation Pastorius. 8 men, chosen for their loyalty to the Reich and trained in Germany's brutal espionage schools, were dispatched to the United States with one purpose: sabotage. Their orders were precise. They were to destroy factories producing war materials, derail trains carrying troops and supplies, and ignite fear in the American public. They arrived on American soil in June 1942, 4 on Long Island, New York, and 4 on Florida's Jupiter Island, smuggled in by U-boat under the cover of darkness. The United States, despite its vast military and intelligence apparatus, had little experience dealing with enemies hidden within its borders. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the nation's resolve and its capacity to defend itself against a war unlike any it had faced before. Yet the mission faltered almost immediately. One of the saboteurs, George Dash, quickly realized the stakes were impossibly high and the chances of success slim. Haunted by moral doubts and the enormity of their plan, he contacted the FBI, revealing the identities and locations of his comrades. Within days, all 8 were apprehended. 6 faced the ultimate punishment and were executed. Operation Pastorius would remain the most infamous of German espionage attempts on U.S. soil, but it was only the beginning. The shock waves of fear and suspicion spread through the nation. Americans who had never considered that enemies might be lurking in their neighborhoods now looked at their surroundings with suspicion. Every stranger, every unfamiliar voice, became a potential threat. The FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, seized the opportunity to expand surveillance programs, monitoring phone calls, mail, and public gatherings with renewed vigor. German espionage, however, was not limited to high-profile operations like Pastorius. Across the United States, where the German military intelligence had been cultivating networks of agents and sympathizers. They recruited Americans and German immigrants who might be persuaded to assist the Reich, using promises of money, ideology, or coercion. These spies were trained to blend in perfectly, to attend social events, to work in factories, and to gather information that could disrupt American war production. The U.S. government, still adjusting to the sudden demands of a global war, struggled to identify and neutralize these threats. Many agents operated undetected for months, sending coded messages via radio transmissions, invisible ink, and even personal couriers. Each intercepted message was a small victory, each missed signal a potential disaster waiting to happen. Simultaneously, Japanese espionage networks were quietly expanding on the West Coast. Japan had watched the rapid growth of American naval power with unease and understood that the industrial cities of California, Oregon, and Washington were critical targets. Agents, sometimes Japanese nationals, sometimes American citizens of Japanese descent, observed shipyards, ports, and military bases, taking detailed notes and transmitting information back to Tokyo. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 heightened the urgency of U.S. counterintelligence efforts. Suspicion and fear intensified, and the government responded with measures both protective and controversial. Alien registration laws required foreign-born residents from Axis nations to register with authorities. Japanese, German, and Italian nationals faced restrictions, and thousands were interned in camps under the pretext of national security. While the majority of these individuals posed no real threat, the policy reflected the tension between civil liberties and wartime necessity, a tension that would reverberate for decades. The FBI's counterintelligence operations became increasingly sophisticated. Agents began conducting surveillance with unprecedented precision, monitoring suspected spies in both urban centers and remote towns. In New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, operatives trailed German and Japanese contacts, tracking their movements, listening to coded conversations, and infiltrating social clubs that served as cover for espionage activities. Informants within immigrant communities provided critical intelligence, often risking their own safety to report clandestine activities. The goal was clear: disrupt networks before they could cause irreversible harm. The lessons learned during these early operations would shape American intelligence practices for the remainder of the war and beyond, laying the groundwork for the eventual creation of centralized post-war agencies like the CIA. Some cases, though smaller in scale, illustrated the persistent danger. A Japanese agent operating in California attempted to photograph shipbuilding facilities, hoping to transmit the images to Tokyo. Another group in Hawaii monitored military installations, seeking vulnerabilities that could facilitate sabotage. In many instances, these individuals were discovered before they could act, their efforts foiled by vigilant citizens or routine law enforcement. The cumulative effect, however, was profound: the realization that enemies could be as close as the next street corner, and that victory in a modern war required vigilance not just on the battlefield, but at home. The legal response to espionage was as complex as the operations themselves. Trials of captured spies tested the limits of constitutional protections in wartime. Military tribunals, civilian courts, and special commissions handled different cases, often with secrecy to prevent sensitive information from reaching enemy hands. Sentences ranged from long-term imprisonment to execution, reflecting the gravity of the threat. Public fascination with these trials was immense, as Americans followed headlines detailing the arrests, betrayals, and confessions of agents who had attempted to strike at the heart of the nation. Newspapers painted vivid pictures of intrigue and danger, contributing to a growing culture of awareness and, at times, paranoia. Yet amid the fear and the legal battles, there were stories of courage and ordinary heroism. Postal workers who noticed suspicious packages, neighbors who reported strange behavior, and FBI agents who worked tirelessly around the clock all contributed to national security. These efforts were unsung but crucial, ensuring that the American home front remained resilient even as Axis spies sought to exploit its vulnerabilities. The combined vigilance of government authorities and civilians demonstrated a new form of wartime engagement, one where victory required both combat and intelligence, action and observation. By the end of 1942, the United States had learned a harsh lesson: the war was not confined to distant continents or oceanic battles. The fight for freedom and security was just as critical on American soil. The episodes of espionage, from daring submarine landings to covert surveillance in city streets, exposed the vulnerability of a nation unprepared for threats within its own borders. They also revealed the capacity of a free society to respond with discipline, intelligence, and courage. The shadows cast by Axis spies were long and insidious, but the light of American vigilance had begun to push them back. The story of espionage during World War II in the United States was far from over. Operation Pastorius had failed, Japanese networks had been partially disrupted, and the FBI had grown stronger, but the presence of enemy agents highlighted the need for ongoing alertness. Lessons learned in those early years would resonate for decades, influencing military strategy, intelligence practices, and the public's understanding of national security. The silent battle fought in offices, homes, and back alleys of American cities was as critical to victory as any battle in Europe or the Pacific. In the shadows of normal life, a hidden war raged, and the outcome would shape the very fabric of the nation. Hidden enemies among us. By the time 1943 rolled around, the United States had transformed from a sleepy observer to a nation fully immersed in global conflict. Factories in Detroit, Chicago, and Los Angeles churned out tanks, airplanes, and munitions at an unprecedented pace. Soldiers trained in endless drills while families adjusted to rationing and uncertainty. Yet amid this surge of patriotism and productivity, the threat of espionage remained ever present. Enemy agents were no longer distant operatives plotting from foreign soil. They were embedded within American communities, moving silently through streets, workplaces, and neighborhoods, collecting information that could change the course of the war. The West Coast, in particular, became a hub of anxiety. The memory of Pearl Harbor was still raw, and military officials feared that Japanese spies could target the vital shipyards and naval bases of California and Washington. Unlike the German saboteurs who had arrived by submarine on the East Coast, Japanese espionage relied heavily on long-term surveillance and community infiltration. Agents often posed as laborers, merchants, or students, quietly noting every detail of dock operations, transport schedules, and troop movements. One of the most significant threats came from so-called fifth columnists, individuals believed to sympathize with Japan and potentially provide intelligence. The mere suspicion of their existence created a climate of tension that affected thousands of American citizens, particularly those of Japanese descent, many of whom were loyal to the United States but subjected to intense scrutiny. The federal government's response was swift and, in some cases, controversial. Following Executive Order 9066, thousands of Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated to internment camps in remote areas of the country. Families were uprooted, businesses abandoned, and communities fractured, all in the name of national security. While historians continue to debate the necessity and morality of these actions, there is little doubt that they reflected the climate of fear created by espionage concerns. The government feared that even one spy could cripple critical supply chains or compromise military secrets. Internment, surveillance, and registration programs became tools to preemptively neutralize potential threats, illustrating the tension between liberty and safety in times of crisis. German espionage operations also continued to pose challenges, though by 1943 many of the most audacious plots had been foiled. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence, had trained numerous operatives in the art of deception and covert observation. Some agents had integrated themselves into communities, gaining employment in industrial centers or social clubs, sending coded messages back to Europe. Many of these networks were disrupted thanks to the vigilance of the FBI and local authorities, but the lessons learned were invaluable. Techniques such as wiretapping, double agents, and cryptographic interception became standard practices, ensuring that the United States could anticipate and neutralize threats before they reached catastrophic proportions. Amid these covert struggles, there were moments of extraordinary courage and ingenuity. Ordinary Americans, often unaware of the larger war, became inadvertent defenders of national security. Postal workers intercepted suspicious packages containing clandestine messages. Shipping clerks noticed irregular cargo manifests. School teachers and neighbors reported unusual behavior among their communities. Each small act of awareness contributed to a larger tapestry of vigilance, demonstrating that in the war against espionage, civilians were just as crucial as soldiers. The war on the home front was fought not only with guns and tanks but with observation, deduction, and moral courage. The stakes of espionage became evident in a series of trials that captured national attention. Individuals accused of spying were brought before courts, their cases shrouded in secrecy to prevent sensitive information from reaching enemy hands. These proceedings highlighted the difficult balance between justice and security. Evidence often relied on intercepted communications, informant testimony, or cryptographic breakthroughs. In some cases, the accused were executed, in others, they faced long-term imprisonment. The trials demonstrated that espionage was not merely a matter of abstract intelligence, it carried real consequences for both the perpetrators and the nation they sought to undermine. Communication technology played a critical role in both espionage and counterintelligence. Radio transmissions, coded letters, and invisible inks were common tools used by Axis spies. The U.S., learning from early mistakes, developed countermeasures that intercepted messages and decrypted codes, often turning enemy communication networks against themselves. Cryptographers worked tirelessly to understand the patterns and ciphers used by foreign agents, while field agents conducted surveillance that uncovered hidden transmitters and secret meetings. The war against espionage had become an intricate game of cat and mouse, with each side adapting rapidly to the other's innovations. By mid-1943, patterns began to emerge. German spies often focused on industrial sabotage, targeting rail lines, chemical plants, and factories. Japanese networks were more concerned with naval intelligence, closely monitoring ports and ship movements. Understanding these patterns allowed the FBI and military intelligence to allocate resources more effectively. Surveillance intensified in high-risk areas, including Los Angeles, Seattle, and New York. Informants were carefully vetted, and federal agents developed sophisticated methods for infiltrating suspected spy cells. The combination of vigilance, analysis, and rapid response became the backbone of American counter-espionage efforts. Yet espionage was not limited to high-profile cases or large networks. Small acts of sabotage and intelligence gathering occurred constantly, often unnoticed by the general public. A seemingly innocent worker taking notes in a factory could be reporting critical information to a foreign power. A casual conversation in a cafe might reveal troop movements or shipment schedules. This pervasive sense of uncertainty reinforced the idea that war had extended far beyond the battlefield. America had to defend not only its soldiers overseas but its citizens and infrastructure at home, against threats that were invisible, elusive, and cunning. The psychological impact of espionage was profound. Americans grew increasingly aware that loyalty was not always obvious, that threats could come from friends, neighbors, or even family members. Schools, workplaces, and communities became sites of subtle surveillance, and ordinary interactions were sometimes colored by suspicion. At the same time, this climate fostered resilience. Citizens learned to pay attention, to act when something seemed out of place, and to cooperate with authorities. The home front became a battleground of perception, intelligence, and responsibility, illustrating that winning a global war required not only armed forces but informed and vigilant civilians. By the close of 1943, it was clear that the United States had begun to master the art of counter-espionage. Operation Pastorius had failed, Japanese networks had been disrupted, and the FBI had become a formidable intelligence organization. However, the threat had not vanished, it had merely evolved. Enemy spies adapted, seeking new methods, new disguises, and new targets. For every network uncovered, another might exist, waiting for opportunity. The struggle between secrecy and vigilance, between enemy cunning and American ingenuity, would continue to define the nation's wartime experience. The hidden battles waged in offices, factories, and residential streets were as decisive as any military engagement abroad. American society had learned that modern warfare extended beyond open combat to include secrecy, surveillance, and subtle manipulation. The war against Axis espionage demonstrated the complexity of defending freedom in a world where enemies were not always visible and where the cost of failure could be catastrophic. Yet in the shadow of these invisible threats, the country discovered a remarkable capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and courage, a capacity that would shape the intelligence landscape for generations to come. Sabotage, secrets, and silent battles. As 1944 dawned, the United States had firmly established itself as a global industrial powerhouse, producing vast quantities of tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. Yet the very success that allowed the Allies to fight on multiple fronts also made the nation a prime target for espionage. Factories teeming with workers, railroads crisscrossing the country, and harbors bustling with supplies all presented irresistible opportunities for Axis spies. These were not mere abstractions, they were living, breathing operations that could tip the balance of war. Every cargo shipment, every assembly line, every telegram held the potential to become a tool of sabotage if enemy agents penetrated the nation's defenses. In cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, clandestine networks operated with stealth and precision. Japanese operatives, often posing as ordinary citizens, gathered intelligence on shipbuilding schedules, fuel depots, and military convoys. They meticulously recorded the movements of supplies destined for the Pacific Theater, transmitting information back to Tokyo through coded messages hidden in letters, newspapers, or seemingly innocuous packages. In some cases, spies exploited commercial routes, working within shipping companies or warehouses to observe and report activity without attracting attention. Each observation, each note, was a thread in a vast tapestry of intelligence, woven carefully to avoid detection but aimed at crippling the American war effort. German espionage, though less centralized on the U.S. West Coast, continued to pursue industrial sabotage. Factories producing synthetic rubber, explosives, and aviation fuel were of particular interest. Agents infiltrated labor unions, social clubs, and even academic institutions, collecting data that could inform strategic attacks. Occasionally, plans surfaced to damage rail lines or industrial plants using explosives or fire, but these plots were often intercepted by the FBI before they could reach fruition. The persistence of these attempts demonstrated the lengths to which Axis powers were willing to go to destabilize America, highlighting the high stakes of domestic intelligence operations. Counterintelligence agencies responded with an ever-increasing array of tools and tactics. Surveillance became both sophisticated and pervasive. FBI agents tracked suspect movements with photographic evidence, secretly monitored radio transmissions, and employed undercover operatives to mingle with suspected spy circles. Analysts worked tirelessly to decode messages, identifying patterns in seemingly ordinary correspondence. Each breakthrough in surveillance or code breaking represented a critical victory, often preventing sabotage before it could occur. The stakes were high. The smallest piece of overlooked information could have catastrophic consequences, turning an ordinary shipment of fuel or munitions into a disaster. The human dimension of espionage was equally compelling. Agents risked their lives daily, moving through hostile territory under false identities. Many lived double lives for years, hiding their loyalties from co-workers, friends, and even family members. Betrayals within these networks were common, as fear, greed, or conscience led operatives to defect or expose their comrades. One of the most dramatic examples involved a Japanese-American couple in California who, fearing discovery, secretly reported their own community's suspicious activities to the FBI. Their actions, though morally complex, helped prevent significant intelligence leaks and illustrated the difficult ethical terrain of wartime espionage. Technology also played an increasing role. The development of shortwave radios, microfilm, and advanced encryption allowed spies to transmit information across continents in mere hours. These innovations forced American intelligence agencies to adapt quickly. Radio operators were traced, hidden transmitters discovered, and cryptographers worked around the clock to break coded messages. Every interception not only prevented immediate harm but also provided insights into enemy methods, improving the nation's ability to anticipate and counteract future threats. It became a battle of ingenuity as much as a battle of courage, where intellect could be as decisive as bravery in the fight to protect the homeland. High-profile trials of captured spies underscored both the dangers of espionage and the government's determination to maintain control. Courtrooms and military tribunals became stages where the narratives of loyalty, betrayal, and ideology were played out. Convicted agents were sentenced harshly, executions, lengthy prison terms, and deportations sent a clear message that the United States would not tolerate subversion. These trials also revealed the sophisticated networks that had taken root in American cities, highlighting just how close the nation had come to serious disruption. For the public, the revelations were chilling, a reminder that the enemy's reach extended far beyond battlefields thousands of miles away. While espionage often inspired fear, it also prompted innovation in domestic security measures. Factory managers implemented tighter access controls, employees were screened for loyalty, and communities were encouraged to report suspicious behavior. Intelligence officers coordinated with military units, law enforcement, and local authorities, creating a web of surveillance and response that was unprecedented in American history. This integration of civil, military, and intelligence resources became a hallmark of the war effort on the home front, illustrating that victory depended as much on vigilance within the nation as on combat abroad. Despite the relentless pressure, Axis spy networks were increasingly strained. Resources were diverted, messages intercepted, and operatives captured. The cumulative effect of these disruptions limited the potential damage that could be inflicted on critical infrastructure. In some cases, planned sabotage was cancelled or abandoned when key operatives were arrested or communications severed. The careful orchestration of counterintelligence efforts demonstrated the evolving sophistication of American agencies and highlighted the value of preparation, foresight, and coordination in safeguarding national security. Psychologically, the awareness of espionage had a profound impact on American society. Communities learned to balance vigilance with trust, understanding that the enemy could hide behind familiar faces. The presence of spies fueled caution and heightened attention to detail in workplaces, neighborhoods, and social circles. Children were instructed to be aware of strangers, office workers to observe unusual behavior, and factory supervisors to verify every shipment. The omnipresence of potential threat cultivated a culture of attentiveness and responsibility, a subtle but important aspect of the broader war effort. By late 1944, the combined efforts of law enforcement, intelligence, and ordinary citizens had significantly reduced the threat posed by Axis spies. High-profile networks had been dismantled, suspicious communities monitored, and critical infrastructure secured. Yet espionage remained a persistent concern, reminding Americans that war was fought on multiple fronts and that vigilance could never be fully relaxed. The hidden battles of spies and counterintelligence officers, though invisible to the average citizen, had proven decisive in maintaining the nation's stability and security. The story of espionage during World War II on American soil thus evolved from daring submarine landings to sophisticated surveillance, From coded messages to intercepted plans, and from fear to a disciplined culture of vigilance. The invisible war waged in offices, ports, factories, and homes revealed that modern conflict was not solely about guns and bombs but also about information, secrecy, and the ability to anticipate an enemy's moves. The United States emerged from these trials stronger, more aware, and better prepared for future challenges, having proven that the courage to defend one's homeland could take many forms, sometimes quiet, sometimes dramatic, but always essential. The endgame and legacy of espionage. By 1945, the tide of World War II had decisively turned. Allied forces were advancing across Europe, and the Pacific campaign against Japan was reaching its climactic stages. Yet while battles raged overseas, a quieter but no less critical struggle had been unfolding on American soil: the relentless fight against Axis espionage. Decades later, historians would recognize that this invisible war, fought in offices, ports, factories, and living rooms, played a vital role in shaping the nation's wartime strategy and its post-war intelligence infrastructure. The final year of the conflict revealed both the successes and limitations of U.S. counterintelligence efforts. Early in the war, the government had grappled with an unfamiliar problem: spies operating undetected among ordinary citizens. By 1945, however, the nation had developed a sophisticated apparatus capable of identifying, monitoring, and neutralizing threats before they could achieve their objectives. Arrests of German and Japanese operatives became increasingly common, with many facing military tribunals or federal prosecutions. One of the most notable cases involved a German spy ring attempting to sabotage American shipping in New York Harbor. Thanks to a combination of intercepted communications, surveillance, and informant reports, the plot was dismantled before a single shipment was harmed, demonstrating the effectiveness of the integrated intelligence network that had grown exponentially since 1941. The technological dimension of espionage had also reached new heights. Radio transmissions, once a primary conduit for enemy messages, had become a battlefield in their own right. The FBI, Army Signal Corps, and Office of Strategic Services, OSS, developed systems capable of detecting, triangulating, and decoding transmissions across vast distances. Microfilm, invisible inks, and encrypted codes, tools once feared as untraceable, were systematically intercepted, often turning the Axis powers' own technology against them. This era of innovation laid the groundwork for modern signals intelligence, establishing principles and methods that would endure long after the last bombs fell in 1945. But espionage was not merely a technical problem, it was a profoundly human one. Operatives, informants, and double agents operated in a moral and psychological gray zone, and their actions often had consequences far beyond immediate tactical objectives. Families were torn apart by suspicion, loyalty, and coercion. Ordinary citizens sometimes found themselves caught between fear and duty, reporting neighbors who might be innocent or inadvertently aiding investigations. The internecine tensions within immigrant communities, particularly Japanese Americans, highlighted the difficult ethical terrain of national security. In some cases, loyalty was proven through courageous cooperation with authorities, while in others, the suspicion of espionage inflicted lasting harm on innocent lives. As the war approached its conclusion, American intelligence agencies began consolidating their lessons and victories into long-term structures. The OSS, which had been created to coordinate clandestine operations abroad, increasingly collaborated with domestic law enforcement to share techniques, methods, and intelligence. The FBI's expertise in surveillance, code breaking, and counter-espionage had expanded dramatically, positioning it to become a central figure in post-war intelligence activities. These wartime experiences revealed a stark truth: In the modern world, national security required constant vigilance, professional training, and the ability to act decisively in moments of uncertainty. One of the most significant achievements of U.S. counterespionage was its ability to prevent widespread sabotage on critical infrastructure. Shipyards, railways, factories, and communication networks, all potential targets, remained largely intact despite repeated attempts by Axis operatives. The cumulative effect of these protections allowed the United States to maintain the flow of troops, equipment, and supplies to battlefronts abroad, directly contributing to the success of Allied operations. In this sense, the silent, largely invisible work of intelligence officers and vigilant citizens was as consequential as any battlefield victory. The end of the war did not erase the memory of espionage or its lessons. Many operatives, once captured or neutralized, were tried, imprisoned, or deported, their cases serving as cautionary tales for both government agencies and the public. Communities learned the importance of vigilance without succumbing to paranoia. Federal agencies recognized the need for permanent intelligence capabilities, leading to early discussions that would eventually culminate in the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency and the expansion of domestic security measures. The war had demonstrated that espionage was not a peripheral concern but a central feature of modern conflict, requiring both strategic foresight and operational expertise. Culturally, the impact of espionage lingered as well. Newspapers, radio programs, and later books chronicled the dramatic stories of spies and counteragents, capturing the imagination of the public. Tales of double agents, coded messages, and thwarted sabotage became part of the national narrative of courage and vigilance. Yet these stories also carried sobering reminders: the line between freedom and security is delicate, and the cost of underestimating invisible threats can be immense. Americans understood that the challenges of the home front were not merely logistical, they were psychological, moral, and societal as well. Looking back, the legacy of World War II espionage on American soil is multifaceted. On one level, it represents a triumph of organization, innovation, and human courage. The ability to detect and neutralize enemy operatives prevented catastrophic disruptions, safeguarded vital infrastructure, and ensured the effective deployment of resources to the front lines. On another level, it reflects the complexity of balancing civil liberties with national security. The internment of Japanese Americans, the scrutiny of immigrant communities, and the tensions within neighborhoods all underscore the moral dilemmas inherent in defending a nation during a time of existential crisis. Ultimately, the hidden battles waged against Axis spies were a defining feature of the American wartime experience. They revealed the reach of global conflict into the domestic sphere, illustrating that victory required more than military might. It demanded intelligence, ingenuity, and the willingness of ordinary citizens to play a role in national defense. The courage of those who served in silence, whether as agents, analysts, or vigilant neighbors, ensured that the United States remained secure while its armed forces fought overseas. Their legacy would influence the Cold War, the development of modern intelligence agencies, and the ongoing understanding of how nations protect themselves from both visible and invisible enemies. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, and Germany had fallen months earlier, the United States emerged not only as a military victor but as a nation profoundly transformed by the experience of domestic espionage. The